What's going on, folks? Meteorologist Mike Linden coming at you live. It is 4:05 Eastern Standard Time here at our studios in Orlando, Florida. I hope that you are all doing well. Of course, the big news of the weather world is Hurricane Laura right now bearing down on the Gulf Coast. There are tornado warnings up right now, and that is just the start of this storm making its way inland. Now, what we wanted to do was a brief little update for you guys here now. We will be back again at 5 o'clock Eastern Time to give you a more thorough breakdown as to what is going on. And we actually have an interview here coming up in just a moment with MyRadar's chief scientist, Stefanie Garamella. So I spoke with him a little while ago to give some insight as to everything that's going on with Laura, the models, and just a whole bunch of interesting stuff. But before we get to that interview with Stefanie, I told you that we would have team coverage, and we have team coverage today. Just not too long ago, meteorologist Stefanie Lauber made her way into the studio. She is standing by. Stefanie, welcome to the coverage of Hurricane Laura. Things are really now just getting started.
Hey Mike, thanks for the welcome. I got my glasses now for those of you who've been following that saga, but let's get right to it. The latest on Hurricane Laura, an impressive and powerful tropical cyclone here in the Gulf of Mexico, sitting at Category 4. So you see up here behind me, we've got the latest stats on the storm. Maximum sustained winds are sitting at 140 miles per hour. Minimum central pressure is showing us that this has intensified quite rapidly here over the past couple of days, sitting at 948 millibars, still moving fairly quickly at 16 miles per hour in a general northwest direction, heading right into the coastline there between Louisiana and Texas. I'll take you now to the MyRadar app, and feel free to follow along with us where we're tracking what's going on here. I've got the hurricane tracker on. You can see the cone taking it right there into the northwest Gulf of Mexico coastline here. We've had some bands moving on shore already. One particularly strong band that's moved on to the Louisiana coastline, moving in. New Orleans, you're about to get some of this coming into. Baton Rouge under those thunderstorms right now. And our storm chaser, Aaron Jajak, who is hanging out in Sulphur, Louisiana, said that this band that moved through was so strong that had intense lightning. And some of those winds there were making the power flash. But this is one of the first bands that we'll be seeing tonight. Some tropical storm force gusts already coming through for the coastline of Louisiana and down into Texas. Some spotty showers moving over the coastline in here to the Houston metro area and into Galveston Bay. We'll zoom in a little bit closer here so you can see some of those stronger storms making their way across I-69 and down I-10. Folks, we'll see things continue to deteriorate here as we go on into the next couple of hours tonight. Again, this is a Category 4 hurricane. I'm going to turn off the hurricane tracker here for a moment so we can focus in with our winds layer. You can see a very tight counterclockwise rotation here. We have an eye that's obvious here on the radar. So a very well-formed and, again, powerful hurricane moving into the coastline. Mike, tell us what it's looking like out there.
Yeah, I mean, we've really seen this thing develop over the past several hours, Stefanie, in the sense where that eye is becoming more and more defined as time has gone on, which is a telltale sign, of course, of strengthening. If we take a look here at the infrared imagery I have on our computer in front of us, I mean, you can really see that kind of prototypical buzzsaw shape here. Not to say that it's the same kind of storm as Dorian was last year, but it really had that quote-unquote look to it. And that eye is really starting to clear out now, as Stefanie just touched on, that strengthening there, totally evident. And of course, with this storm, jumped ahead there for you here, a hurricane warning, of course, is in place for the southern coastline of Louisiana and Texas. It is really hustling now, folks. And it is quickly, I mean, as far as getting any kind of preparations done, your time is pretty much up for that to be the case. It really is shaping up to be quite a storm, as Stefanie touched on. It is certainly strengthening, becoming a lot stronger and a lot more violent. But as we continue to get all of the latest information that's coming in here, we're going to toss it over to that interview I told you with our chief scientist and COO of MyRadar, Stefanie Garamella. Remember, we're going to come back after that interview, do another brief little touch on what is going on with Stefanie and I, and then we will be back ready for 5 o'clock. That is when the next big update drops from the National Hurricane Center as this storm bears down on the coastline. So until we get back, here's that interview with Servais. We'll be right back, guys. Okay. All right. So clearly we're having some issues with that interview with Servais there. We've got a lot going on, as I'm sure you can imagine. No big deal. We will try to get that working here. So Damien behind the scenes, as always. Damien is really rocking things out. Damien, if you wouldn't mind trying to bring that interview back in. In the meantime here, if you can actually take the weather graphics here in full while we are fixing that, Damien, I can, whatchamacallit, or if you can bring up a 2-shot of Stefanie and I, we can kind of talk through some things and we can answer some of the questions that is coming in on the chat. So if you can bring up that 2-shot with Stefanie and I. All right. So again, we are looking at the current watches and warnings here. As Hurricane Laura continues to strengthen, again, looking at it on infrared imagery, it certainly is a violent-looking storm, and it is following that path from the National Hurricane Center, following it right along almost to a T. They really have worked to nail things down here. But remember, the worst part to this is the potential for the storm surge. A storm surge warning in place for both Louisiana and the upper portion of the Texas coastline there. So Damien, let me know whenever Stefanie is ready to go here so we can take that 2-shot. That way we can talk through some things. There it is. Okay, so Stefanie, of course, you were born, or at least you've lived almost your entire life in Florida. You were born here, right? I know at one point
I was not born in Florida. My parents were snowbirds, but that's okay because I've been here long enough. We keep that a secret.
Right. So, yeah, you are a Floridian. Compared to storms that you've seen in the past, and this is all while Damien is trying to bring that interview in, with storms that you have seen in the past, how does Hurricane Laura, at least where it stands right now, kind of stack up to those storms? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot as we're working through technical difficulties.
No,
but
let's nerd out about it. That's what we're here for at My Radar. One
Right.
of the most impressive things about this storm, Mike, is that the placement is what's problematic. This part of the Gulf Coast, a lot of that, there's a lot of recovery efforts for that marshaling out on the southern Louisiana border because with the Mississippi River, Army Corps of Engineers trying to do their best to mitigate the land loss that's happening there. So that makes that coastline very vulnerable, which is why the National Hurricane Center has issued those storm surge warnings, expecting parts of the Gulf of Mexico to come in as much as 30 miles inland. So that's kind of incredible when you think about it with storm surge. I mean, that's not typically something that, say, Floridians would worry about because we have all these barrier islands that go around the peninsula and things like that. And folks along Texas, we've seen storms similar like this before, but something that is notable is that we haven't had a major hurricane move through the area since Harvey, and it wasn't quite in this area. It was a bit further south near Rockport, Texas, down the coastal bend there. And really, folks here haven't seen something like this since Rita back in 2005.
I was just gonna touch on that. At the beginning of this season, of course, we did that entire hurricane series, you, I, and Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson, where we talked about the analogs, right? And for those watching at home, meaning taking this year, what does it compare to? That's really helpful considering we have so much weather data to look upon. It's almost like in sports where you can say, oh, this player is doing such and such. It compares to such and such way back when. You can look at those statistics in the world of weather and kind of look at what could potentially happen just based on the conditions that are present. And the big year, the analog that stood out to this year was 2005. Of course, Katrina, Rita, some really rough hurricanes. And Rita seems to be the most comparable to Laura that we are dealing with right now.
Yeah, and something else that's important to note, we've been tracking this forecast for you for the past a week, it seems, when we were first dealing with Marco and now with Laura. And we've been telling you about why Laura has made this path into the Gulf of Mexico and what's kind of carried it along. And this is something we mentioned over the weekend, is that this thing has really had not really any enemies to help hinder it, because it's just blossomed over those warm Gulf of Mexico waters. And aside from a little bit of dry air yesterday and a little bit of shear from that trough, that steering mechanism over Texas right now, it isn't going to have too much to help with it. But something that we'll be looking forward to as we head into the later hours tonight is maybe some shear from that trough will help drop that maximum sustained wind risk just by a couple of clicks. But nonetheless, there isn't a big difference between 140 miles per hour and 130 miles per hour. That's still an impressive force of nature.
Exactly. Enough for some catastrophic damage. So we have the interview re-racked. Again, big shout out to the guys running the show here behind the scenes, Matt and Damien. I mean, Matt was up till 5 o'clock in the morning working with Leslie. Damien has been here this morning with and we'll be back again tomorrow. We are not really going to be sleeping all that much through this, but that's the least that we can do to keep this thing covered. So we're going to try to toss it to that interview with Servais. If it doesn't work out, we'll come back to us and we'll figure it out from there. That's the world of, I guess, live TV or being on the internet, Stefanie, just kind of rolling with the punches. We're used to it. So let's send it to that interview with Servais. Take 2 with the chief scientist. Okay, so clearly again, there is something wrong with that video file. We are going to have to figure that one out, needless to say. Before we go then, again, because we are preparing for that big update here at 5 o'clock, that's when we're really going to dig into the meteorological meat, if you will. So Stefanie, I'm just going to pull up some of the questions here that we have in the chat, and we can answer some. Okay, stand by, everybody. Okay, there we go. So, all right, so we've got Michelle talking a whole bunch of mess. Sorry about that, Michelle. We've got Justin asking this question. Is Missouri in the path? So, Stefanie, is Missouri in the path based on what you are seeing?
Storm moving inland, and it follows this latest forecast cone. Of course, we got another one coming out here just at the top of the hour at 5 o'clock Eastern, but following that forecast cone, this storm will make its way up through Texarkana, and folks in Arkansas, Missouri, and parts of the Mississippi River Valley will have to be on watch not for a Category 4 hurricane. I don't want to scare you into thinking you're going to get this powerful storm moving all the way through the inner parts of the U.S. But yeah, you're going to be dealing with some tropical downpours by the time this storm moves in. Could bring some very gusty winds. It's going to take a bit for the circulation to kind of fall apart here once it makes its way onshore. But as we move in through the forecast cone here, out by I believe this is, I've lost my days here, but about day 3, we're seeing this thing move into parts of southern Missouri, even parts of southern Illinois, south of Indianapolis. And again, this cone just accounts for the center. That doesn't speak for the outer bands. And this is not going to be a very clean looking storm on radar once it moves inland. Again, that friction comes into play and this thing just falls apart. But folks there should be on watch for a couple of those heavier storms that will be moving through in the next couple of days. And that's a great use for the app here. You can track it along with us and follow all the coverage that Mike, Leslie, and I have been putting out here. We'll stick with this storm all the way until it is no longer a threat. So, yeah, Mike, that's a great question there. What else we got?
All right, so we've got a couple of more questions here, but again, with the technical issues that we are having, we want to work through those here behind the scenes before we come back at 5. One thing I can assure you here, something that I saw in the chat, someone said that this is all fake news. I assure you, what is behind me here, this hurricane, this Category 4 hurricane, this is most certainly not fake news. This is a very real situation that is, again, likely going to cause catastrophic damage and is strengthening here on its final approach to land. So I assure you, I implore you to take this seriously, even if you are not there right in kind of the direct path of it. As Stefanie just touched on, For the folks that are away from it, you're still likely looking at storm surge along the coastline, potential severe thunderstorms bubbling up, and of course those strong winds associated with it. So it is a big storm creating for a lot of mess even in the Florida panhandle. So it is a rather large storm affecting a good chunk of the Gulf Coast. But again, we're going to work things out here technical wise. Hopefully my camera's focusing in. Looks like it just did there. So again, we will be back at 5 o'clock Eastern time where we will have the latest. We'll try to get that Survation interview fixed. Again, the chief scientist from my radar to give some insight into the models and the big picture stuff that the National Hurricane Center is looking at. It's a great interview. That's why we really want to share it with you. Of course, I will be here with meteorologist Stefanie Lauber to take you through the afternoon until Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson is here for landfall, and she will be live for really as long as that takes. So again, we will be back coming up in about 40 or so minutes. We'll see you at 5 o'clock. Stay tight and, of course, stay safe. We'll see you in a bit.